In today's video, we're going to discuss the process of pressing. What is pressing and how does it differ from ironing? Ironing is the process of using your iron to remove wrinkles from an already sewn garment. You may see someone doing ironing by taking the iron and kind of aggressively wiggling it across your fabric. However, I would definitely caution you against doing that wiggle move. Working the iron back and forth in such a manner actually will sometimes distort the fabric and cause the yarns to stretch and pull apart from one another. This could result in a misshapen or ill-fitting garment in the end. Pressing is a technique specific to sewing that happens during the sewing process. It involves taking the iron and gently running it along your seams to help set the thread in place, and then using the iron to direct your seam allowances in one direction or another, or in most cases even spreading them open. Proper pressing is an essential step in creating a nice, crisp, well-sewn garment. Let's begin by discussing some do's and don'ts of iron usage. The major safety tip involving irons is you will never want to set the hot plate of your iron directly onto your pressing surface. Doing so could cause you to start to burn through your ironing board, or worse yet, even set a fire. So, if you have an iron with a flat back end, you'll always want to place the iron sitting upright on that flat base so that the hot plate is not directly on your pressing surface. Or, the hot plate of your iron can be placed onto a heat-resistant silicone pad. You'll want to make sure that you always have your iron set to the appropriate temperature based on your fabric type. For pressing muslin, you'll usually want your iron on a nice hot setting that is intended for cotton. Other types of fabrics will want a lower heat, specifically if they're composed of a synthetic fiber. Most irons will have a variable temperature knob underneath the handle, so you'll always want to check that knob and make sure it's set appropriately for the type of fabric that you are pressing. Again, cottons and linens particularly want a higher heat, and they can handle that higher heat. But silks and wools usually want around a medium heat, and anything synthetic needs to be on a very low heat to prevent it from melting. If you're unsure of the best iron temperature for the fabric you're using, or you're working with a new fabric that you don't have much experience with, the best thing is always to test your fabric on the iron before you go right into your project. If your iron leaves any sort of sheen on the surface of the fabric or discolors the fabric in any way, which typically happens a lot with darkly colored fabrics, or especially if it scorches or melts the fabric in any way, then you'll know that your iron temperature is too hot for that fabric and you'll want to reduce it. Some types of fabrics will be prone to these types of things anyways. If that is the case and your fabric proves to be very delicate, then you'll want to use a piece of muslin on top of your seams as you press. This is called a pressing cloth and is meant to eliminate the harsh burn of the iron against delicate fabrics. Less delicate fabrics, like muslin, can typically be pressed on both the wrong and right side of the fabric, meaning the inside and the outside. Pressing on both sides of the fabric will ultimately give you a sharper, more crisp press. However, if you're working with a more delicate fabric, then you'll want to use a press cloth when pressing from the right side to avoid leaving any marks from the iron. Always make sure you're pressing on a proper ironing surface. This can be a proper ironing board, or what I'm using right here is one of my favorite things ever. It actually is an ironing pad that can be set on any tabletop surface and is heat resistant just like an ironing board. Plus, for those of you who are limited on space, it's really great because it can just be folded up and put away in a drawer or cupboard. Sometimes when using an ironing board, if the padded cover has been worn a little bit thin, you may notice some wire mesh marks coming through to your fabric and leaving an imprint behind. If you notice this happening, then a quick fix would be to lay a towel on top of your ironing board to provide a little bit more cushioning to the ironing surface. There are also various shaping tools that really come in handy whenever you're pressing anything curved or three-dimensional. This one is called the tailor's ham. It's really great for pressing darts as well as any curved seams, or any time you really want to isolate a certain section of your garment as you're pressing it. Sometimes, once a garment has come more together, it can be very easy to accidentally press ugly folds into the surrounding areas of your garment. So to be sure that you're only pressing on the part you want to, you can place the hem underneath the area you want to focus on, and the rest of the garment and fabric can just drape and fall off of the sides of it, preventing them from being pressed. This one is called a sleeve board. It can be very handy whenever you're pressing the hem of anything that comes in a tight circle, such as a sleeve or the bottom hem of a pair of pants. A variation of the sleeve board is something called a sleeve roll, which is just a long padded roll that has a similar elongated shape to the sleeve board and serves the same purpose. If you do not have either of these items, sometimes you can accomplish the same thing by just tightly rolling up a towel to place under or stuff into the section that you are trying to press. Let's go over the basic process of pressing a seam open. All seams will need to be pressed with the seam allowances directed to either one side or the other, or pressed completely open, as we're about to do. Regardless of which direction you're pressing your seam allowances, the first step will always be to take the iron and just gently pass it over the stitches. This helps them to sort of sink into the fabric and helps your seam to set. Next, you'll take your fabric and spread it open with the seam allowances facing up. Pressing your seam allowances open involves splitting them apart so that they're pressed back to either side. A good way to begin this process, especially with muslin that can hold a finger press, is to use your fingertips to first press the seam open before you come in with the iron. Be sure that you've pulled your fabric open nicely in doing so and that you're not catching any ridges in your seam as you press. After finger pressing, then come in with the iron, and you're going to run the tip of the iron right up through the center of the seam. You can also give it a touch or two of steam as you go, but you'll want to be conservative with the steam for this process. This muslin, along its raw edges, will tend to curl sometimes if it gets overly steamed, and it becomes hard to work with. So keep your steam isolated to just the seam area and just a couple touches. After you've pressed on the wrong side of the garment with your seams open, to get an even sharper press, you'll want to flip it over and repeat the process from the right side or outside of the seam.